At 7:41 that Monday, 96 trucks idled below 26th Street, and the dispatch board read 96.4%, the highest on-time rate our federal freight lane had ever posted. Nobody was looking at the number. They were looking at me. My name is Owen Yarborough. I'm 57, and for 24 years I've been the reason those trucks left this building clean, inspected, and legal, whatever the weather did to the FDR drive. The number mattered for a reason nobody in that room knew. My wife's specialist wanted $255,000 for a treatment our insurance called elective, due by the 20th of October, 15 days out. I hadn't told anyone at Hollis Norwood Logistics that figure. 24 years of designated authority, board resolutions, and regulatory sign-offs teaches a man which numbers he carries alone and what cost savings sounds like when it's aimed at him instead of a budget line. We stood on the mezzanine of the old Star at Lehigh building on 26th Street in Manhattan, New York, freight elevators still turning on gears older than the company itself. My badge reel stayed clipped to my belt, dented stainless, the cord fraying where it met the housing. It carried the compliance credential nobody upstairs remembered signing over to me 2 decades ago, back when the board still needed someone the regulators would trust on site without asking twice. I didn't ask what the whispering meant. Asking is what people do when they think a question can still stop something already decided. I learned that from a colonel in Kandahar who let a captain argue fuel allocation for 10 minutes, listened to every word of it, and reassigned him anyway before the convoy left the wire. Some lessons cost nothing to learn twice, and I'd never needed a third telling of that one. The building smelled the way it always did before 8. Diesel threading up through the dock vents, cold concrete, the ozone tang of freight motors warming under the mezzanine. A compressor kicked somewhere below with a shudder I felt in my boots before I heard it, the kind of sound a system makes right before it goes quiet for good. 24 years ago, I'd signed a compensation agreement nobody had reread since, myself included, tucked into an addendum most people in this building didn't know existed. I wasn't thinking about it that morning. I was thinking about the balloon payment, and about how a company moving $3.5 billion in freight a year could still be run by people who mistook a designated authority for an inconvenience they'd inherited along with the building. Somebody new was starting today. I'd heard the name twice already, Turek, and it came with a small, involuntary tightening in Samuel Cross's jaw when he said it near the dispatch monitors. Samuel had run this floor's overnight shift for 11 years and never once needed to raise his voice to move a truck. He didn't editorialize. If his jaw tightened, there was a reason for it, and I filed that away the way I filed everything, quietly, for later. I capped my coffee, checked the manifest board once more, and walked toward the glass conference room where somebody was already waiting to explain what cost savings meant this time, on a Monday that had started, by every number that mattered, as the best morning this building had posted in years. The room moved on to other business without realizing whose names still guaranteed every truck in that federal lane was legally allowed to drive. By 9 that morning, the floor had already swallowed the meeting whole, the way it swallowed everything that wasn't a truck leaving on schedule. I didn't need the exception report to tell me Bay 14 was wrong. After 24 years, I could hear it in the rhythm of the lift gate, one beat too fast, the sound a hydraulic seal makes right before it starts leaking instead of holding. I walked the length of the dock without hurrying, past drivers checking straps, past a supervisor arguing with a scanner that wouldn't read a manifest code. 22 years ago, I'd written half the inspection protocol still taped inside every cab on this floor, back when Hollis Norwood Logistics ran 40 trucks instead of 4,000, and the founder chased federal contracts personally, with a handshake instead of a schedule number. At Bay 14, I found what I expected. The driver, a kid named Torres who'd been with us 11 months, had logged his pre-trip inspection at 6:58, 6 minutes before the truck's onboard system recorded the lift gate cycling for the first time that morning. A small gap. The kind nobody flags unless they know exactly what a real inspection sounds like against a rushed one. You checked the gate before or after you logged it? I asked him. Before, Torres said, too fast. I didn't argue. I climbed the 2 steps, ran my palm along the gate's hinge plate, and felt the give in a bolt that should have had none. Feel that? He felt it. His face did the thing faces do when a shortcut turns out to have a cost attached. Log the actual sequence next time, I told him. Not the one that looks clean on paper. The floor doesn't care what the paperwork says. It only cares what's true. That was the whole exchange. No write-up, no escalation, just a bolt torqued back to spec 11 minutes later, and a kid who'd remember it longer than any memo would have taught him. This was the part of the job nobody put in a headline. 24 years of catching the 6-minute gaps before they became 6-hour ones, of knowing which sound belonged to a system working and which belonged to one about to fail somebody's paycheck, or worse. I signed the corrected inspection log myself, the way I'd signed thousands before it, my name sitting under a designation most people in this building had never bothered to read the definition of. Compliance Officer of Record, for words that meant, in practice, that every one of the 96 trucks that had crossed 26th Street that morning was legally entitled to be on the road because I had said so, in writing, under my own signature and nobody else's. Francesca Caruso caught me on my way back through the dock office. Legal didn't usually surface before 10. "You hear anything about this morning's headcount review?" she asked, capping her pen without uncapping it first, the way she always did when she wasn't ready to say more than the question itself. "No," I said. "Should I have?" She didn't answer that directly. She just looked at me a half-second longer than the question required, then walked toward the elevators. I went back to the manifest board, checked the afternoon lanes, and didn't think about it again until the meeting invite landed in my inbox 40 minutes later, timestamped for 1 o'clock, no agenda listed, my name and one other name on it. Something in that building was now running on a countdown, and nobody had told me which one. The glass conference room on the 3rd floor still smelled like new carpet. Wade Turek was already inside when I got there, standing instead of sitting, a tablet propped against a water pitcher like a stage prop he hadn't decided how to use yet. "Owen." He said my name like he was trying it out. He tapped his watch twice, rose gold, the kind that costs more than most of my drivers make in a month, then looked up like the tapping had answered some question I hadn't asked. "Have a seat. This won't take long." I didn't sit. "I've got trucks moving. That's actually what I want to talk about." He turned the tablet around. A slide, my department's org chart, redrawn with half the boxes shaded gray. "We're not cutting people. We're right-sizing velocity across the network. Compliance has been running the same headcount since before I was in business school. Compliance runs the same headcount because the federal contract requires the same headcount," I said. "That's not a design choice. That's the law." Sure. He set the tablet down, picked up a marker from the tray instead, and started tapping it against his palm, the plastic clicking each time it landed. "But a lot of what you file, be honest with me, it's paperwork theater. Compliance theater. Nobody upstairs reads 80% of it. The federal inspectors read all of it," I said. "Every quarter." He smiled the way people smile when they've already decided you're wrong and are being generous by not saying so. "I've read the inspection reports you've been filing. Thorough, genuinely. But thorough isn't the same as necessary, and I think you know the difference better than anyone in this building." "I know the difference between necessary and expensive," I said. "They're not always the same thing either." "Give me one," he said. "Every axle weight violation caught before it left this dock instead of on the turnpike," I said. "That's the difference. It just never makes a slide. Cute story. Doesn't move freight." "No," I said. "It just keeps it legal enough to move at all." He set the marker down hard enough that it rolled off the tray onto the floor between us, and neither of us moved to pick it up. "I'm not here to fight about semantics, Owen. I'm here because this network moves 4,000 trucks a day, and somebody upstairs finally asked why compliance costs what it costs. I'd rather you hear that from me than read it in a memo." "Then I'm hearing it," I said. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Nothing yet." He tapped the watch again, twice, the same rhythm as before. "Just wanted you to know the review's happening. Professional courtesy." I didn't answer that. He was already a half step closer to the door than the conversation required. "I want to say something here, off the record, because this channel is still new and every person watching it still matters to me individually. I don't know yet how this particular story ends. But if stories like this one are worth 15 minutes of your evening, staying with us is what keeps a new one arriving every day." Back to it. Walking out, I asked myself the only question that mattered that afternoon. Was I about to spend the next week defending a headcount, or defending a signature nobody in that room had thought to look up yet? Whatever that review turned into, it started with a folder nobody in that room had actually opened yet. Wednesday, Wade didn't call a meeting. He walked onto the dispatch floor himself at 9 sharp, a folder under one arm, HR's Denise a half step behind him like a chaperone nobody had asked for. The floor smelled the way it always did mid-morning, diesel and cold coffee, and none of it changed while my compensation did. He tapped his watch twice before he even reached me. Owen, got a minute? We stood by the manifest board, 96 trucks still rolling somewhere below us. None of them aware their compliance officer was about to take a 50% pay cut standing up. The compensation review's done, he said, sliding the folder across the counter instead of a desk, like the setting made it casual. Effective today, your base drops 50%. We're right-sizing velocity across every legacy function, and compliance came out of the review as, structurally, one of the heaviest. I didn't reach for the folder yet. 50%. It's not personal, Owen. It's math. The restructuring saves the network $8.9 million a year, and honestly, most of that's coming from headcount you'd agree we've been carrying too long. Most of it, I said. Not mine. Some of it's yours. I won't pretend otherwise. He tapped the watch again, like the number needed timing to land correctly. Look, the General Services Administration schedule contract basically renews itself at this point, that whole package delivery line item. It's not like the job's getting harder. It's compliance theater, mostly, and theater doesn't need a 50% premium attached to it. I opened the folder. Read it once. All the way through, the way I read every document that mattered, no matter how badly someone wanted me to sign it fast. I want this in writing, dated today, stating the compensation change and the effective date exactly as you've said them out loud just now. It's already written down, he said, tapping the page. You're holding it. Then I want a copy sent to my personal file and to legal, today, before end of day, not next week. I said it flat, the way I'd say a torque spec. Not a threat. A procedure. He blinked, the first unrehearsed thing he'd done all morning. Sure. Fine. Denise, make sure that happens. Denise nodded and made a note. One more thing, I said. Who's the backup compliance officer of record while this settles? For the federal filings. Nobody's changing your title, Owen. You're still on the paperwork. That's not what I asked. If my compensated status changes materially, some of our federal designations require a documented successor on file. Is there one? He tapped the watch, twice, and for the first time that morning didn't have an answer ready. That's not really my department. HR handles designations. Denise? I asked. Denise looked at Wade, not at me, and didn't say anything at all. I capped my pen, folded the sheet once, and slid it into my jacket pocket without another word about it. We good? Wade asked, already half-turned toward the elevator, the watch catching the light. We're accurate, I said. That's a different thing. He left without asking what I meant, which told me everything about how thoroughly the review had actually been conducted. On its own, a 50% cut might have stayed just that, one man's bad Wednesday. But Friday morning already had a federal compliance review sitting on a calendar at 9 sharp, and no one in that building had thought to connect the two yet. I didn't go straight home that Wednesday. I went down to the sub-basement archive instead, where Hollis Norwood still kept 20 years of paper nobody had digitized, because nobody had ever needed to. My badge reel got me through the cage door the way it had for 2 decades, the stainless housing cold in my palm, the cord catching on the latch, half a second of friction before it gave. The archive smelled like dust and old toner, rows of steel shelving nobody had relabeled since the last director retired. I didn't need the index binder. After 24 years I knew the system by shape alone. Personnel files from the founder's era shelved by hire year, not name, a quirk nobody else had bothered to learn. I walked straight to the third bay, third shelf, and pulled the box down without checking a label. The file inside was thin, for pages, dated the spring I'd turned 33, a senior compensation agreement, the kind the founder used to write personally for anyone he didn't want a competitor poaching. I'd forgotten most of the language. I hadn't forgotten section 12.3. The rule was simple. If my total compensation dropped below the floor the agreement set, and the company failed to formally reassign that federal designation to a qualified replacement within 48 hours of that drop taking effect, my sign-off authority over vehicle inspection reverted to a standing override, locked to my name alone, until a proper reassignment was filed. 48 hours. Not a suggestion. A clock, written into an addendum most people in that building didn't know existed, that started the moment Wade's 50% cut had gone into the system that morning. I photographed every page on my personal phone, then made a second set on the archive's own copier, because Section 12.3 belonged in more than one place before Friday. That was the only active thing I did all evening. Not a warning sent, not a call made, just paper moved somewhere it couldn't quietly disappear. I did the arithmetic once, standing there under the archive's cage lighting. My sign-off authority alone touched roughly $1.71 billion in annual freight that only moved because a federally designated officer said it could. Nobody upstairs had ever priced that number either. Replacing the officer whose signature the federal paperwork depended on isn't a form you fill out by lunch. Stepping into that role requires a 90-day certification process, background review included, plus a written exam most candidates failed the first time. Hollis Norwood had never once, in 24 years, kept a second qualified name on file, because nobody had ever priced out what not keeping one might cost. That was the barrier nobody upstairs had thought about. There was no shortcut version of me waiting in a drawer, ready to be reassigned by Friday. My phone buzzed once while I worked, an email from a General Services Administration contracting specialist named Ruiz, addressed to me as the compliance point of contact on file, confirming Friday's review at 9, documentation requested in advance. Ordinary. The kind of email that arrives 40 times a year and means nothing, except that this year it meant someone in Washington still had my name down as the one who'd answer for it. I locked the cage door behind me, badge reel retracting with its familiar drag, and drove home past every truck still moving legally, because a signature nobody had reassigned still belonged to me. 48 hours doesn't sound like much until you've spent the first 2 of them being congratulated for how smoothly the transition was going. By Thursday morning, Wade had renamed the department. Not officially, nothing HR would ever put on a letterhead, but the new placard outside my office read Velocity OPS in vinyl lettering, layered directly over compliance and safety. You'll like it once it settles, Wade said, catching me reading it in the hallway, tapping his watch twice before he'd even finished the sentence. It's a placard, Wade. It's a philosophy. We're not cutting people. We're right-sizing velocity, and a name costs nothing while it signals everything upstairs wants to hear. Does upstairs know what's still bolted to the wall underneath it? That's the old sign. It's coming down by Friday. It signals something, I said, and left it there. He'd called an all-hands for 10. Slide deck. Breakfast spread nobody touched. Compliance overhead is down 11% quarter over quarter, he told 90 people, clicking to a chart with an arrow pointing where he wanted. The old inspection cadence gets streamlined starting today. Priya here will be handling overflow certification filings, and honestly, once the process is documented properly, most of this becomes self-service. We've been overstaffing a checklist for a decade. Somebody asked if the federal contract required a specific headcount. Wade didn't slow down. The federal contract requires accurate paperwork, he said. It doesn't require it to be expensive. Priya, 3 seats from the front, raised a hand halfway and put it down again. Afterward, in the hallway, she caught up to me. There's a form, she said. Axle classification. I wasn't sure which code applies to the box trucks versus the tractor trailers, and nobody walked me through it. Who told you to file it before someone checked it? I asked. Wade said it was self-explanatory. He said you trained people on it in an afternoon before. I trained people on it over 6 weeks, I said. Bring me what you filed this morning. Am I in trouble? No, I said. You did what you were told with the training you were given. That's not the same thing as a mistake being yours. By early afternoon, I had it in front of me. She'd transposed 2 digits, a detail so specific it would mean nothing to anyone who hadn't spent years reading these forms, and it made a routine truck read, on paper, as a category it wasn't. Samuel found the same error independently, out of habit rather than instruction. Velocity's really moving now, Samuel said, deadpan, sliding his own flagged copy across my desk. Don't, I said, but I was already reaching for a pen. Wouldn't dream of it. He went back to his monitors without another word about it. I corrected the filing myself and said nothing to Wade, because saying something wasn't my job anymore, not at the rate he was paying for it now. The phone on Samuel's desk rang at 2. He answered, listened, then covered the receiver. The federal agency, about Friday. Confirming 9 o'clock, badge access for 2 reviewers, and parking instructions for their vehicle. He passed me the handset. This is Owen Yarborough, I said. Yes. We'll have everything ready. Wonderful, the voice on the line said. See you Friday, Mr. Yarborough. I hung up. Small, procedural, the kind of call that means an actual person is coming, not just an email on a calendar. Wade closed the all hands early, pleased with himself, the watch catching the light on his way out. Nothing had broken yet. Every piece of it was simply doing exactly what it had always been built to do, waiting on one signature to finish deciding what happened next. At 9 o'clock that Friday, 48 hours to the minute after Wade's cut had taken effect, the vehicle inspection portal returned an error nobody on the dispatch floor had ever seen before. Authorization reverted, designated officer override active. I wasn't there. I was in my kitchen, coffee in hand, listening to traffic on the radio. Samuel called at 9:06. Owen, every new inspection sign-off since 9 o'clock is bouncing back unassigned. Priya's queue is frozen. What did you do? Nothing, I said, and it was true. Check who the portal says holds the authority. A pause. It says you. Then that's who holds it, I said, and drank my coffee. I pulled up the photograph page on my phone anyway, and checked it against the error code Samuel had read me. It matched, word for word. By 9:20, 3 drivers on federal lanes sat in their cabs, unable to pull certified paperwork. By 9:35, the queue had 40 backed-up filings, and Priya was calling Samuel every few minutes asking what to tell people. Wade called at 9:41. I let it ring twice before answering. Owen, the portal's broken. It's kicking every sign-off back to some override queue with your name on it. It's not broken, I said. It's doing exactly what it was built to do. Can you clear it? Whatever stuck? I can't clear an authority I already hold, I said. You need to reassign it to someone else first. Filed, formal, with the Federal Registry. How long does that take? 90 days, I said. Give or take a background review. There has to be something faster. There isn't, I said. That was the point of writing it that way. He hung up. Nobody called again asking me to fix anything, because fixing it was never a form Wade could sign. At 9:52, Francesca called. The federal reviewers just walked into the building, Owen. 2 of them. They're asking for whoever's federally on record for sign-off, by name, and the front desk sent them to Wade's office. That's the wrong office, I said. I'm aware. I heard her capping and uncapping her pen, a habit I'd never once seen her break before. Do you understand what this actually is? Massive exposure, Owen. $3.38 billion in federal linked freight authority, and we have 48 hours to fix a lapse before it starts compounding across every open contract. That's roughly $70 million an hour, every hour this stays broken. I understand it exactly, I said. I read the clause Wednesday night. At 10 o'clock, the federal reviewers requested the signed designation letter naming whoever held that sign-off authority. Wade produced my name, my old title, no reassignment filing, no successor on record. One reviewer made a call of her own. By 10:40, our delivery authorization under the schedule contract was flagged for administrative hold, freight movement suspended until a corrected designation was filed and verified in Washington. Francesca called again at 11:15, her voice flatter than I'd ever heard it. They've placed the schedule contract on hold. Formally. In writing. I know, I said. You knew this was coming. I knew the rule existed, I said. I didn't write it into effect. Wade's signature did that Wednesday morning. I made a second cup of coffee while she talked, the kettle ticking as it cooled, ordinary sounds in a kitchen 48 hours removed from a decision somebody else had made without checking the paperwork first. The rule wasn't cruel. It wasn't even unusual. It was simply still working, exactly as written, long after everyone who'd mattered had stopped believing paperwork like that could actually move anything at all. At 2, Francesca called it a meeting instead of what it actually was. 16 people's worth of aftermath sitting in the same glass conference room where Wade had first sat me down 84 hours earlier. Somebody had finally scraped velocity OPS off the door outside, and the adhesive residue still caught the overhead light in a shape nobody had bothered to clean off yet. The room smelled like the same instant coffee it always did, and under it, faintly, the ozone tang the dock always sent up through the vents when volume was heavy. Dispatch downstairs had never actually stopped moving. It had just stopped moving legally. Wade tried composure first. Watch tapped. Twice. Out of habit more than confidence now. This is fixable. It's a paperwork lag, not the compliance theater everyone's treating it as. I've asked legal to expedite a designation change. There's no expedited version, Francesca said. She set a single folder on the table, unopened. The compensation floor clause in Mr. Yarborough's 2009 agreement. Properly executed, witnessed, never amended, never superseded by any later policy. I confirmed that against the original in the archive this morning. That's boilerplate language nobody's enforced in 17 years, Wade said. It's not a real clause. It's legacy language somebody forgot to delete. It's a contract, Francesca said. Contracts don't expire from being ignored. Wade turned to me directly for the first time. You knew about this Wednesday. You could have said something. I asked you Wednesday who the backup for that federal designation was. I said. You told me it wasn't your department. That's not the same as warning me the whole authority would revert. I'm not required to warn you what your own signature does, I said. That's what reading it first is for. Wade looked at Francesca. My uncle can override this. He's still chairman. Chairman doesn't outrank a properly executed personal contract, Francesca said. Not without Mr. Yarborough's consent, and not retroactively. You can call him. I already did. Something in Wade's face went still, the kind of stillness that isn't calm, just the absence of a next line. He set the folder he'd been holding down on the table, careful, silent, and didn't pick it back up. The federal hold stays in place until a corrected designation is filed and Mr. Yarborough's compensation is restored to the contracted floor, Francesca said. That's not negotiable. What's negotiable is everything downstream of it, and I'd like to close that today. What do you want? Wade asked me, quieter now. Restoration, I said. In writing. And Priya gets proper training before anyone hands her another form to file alone. Francesca nodded once, already writing. Reinstatement at the contracted rate, retroactive to Wednesday. Formal designation confirmed within the hour. Priya transitioned into the certification program, fully trained, on the company's schedule, not her own. She looked at Wade. You'll sign this before the reviewers leave the building. Samuel, standing near the door with his notebook still in hand, didn't say a word through any of it. He didn't need to. He'd already written down everything worth remembering, dated and time-stamped. The way he'd kept his own shadow log for years without anyone asking him to. Outside the glass wall, I could see the dispatch floor starting to move again, one truck at a time, drivers checking manifests that would finally clear. Wade signed it. His hand didn't move the way it had 2 days earlier, tapping and certain. It moved like a man closing out an account he'd never actually understood the balance of. 11 days later, on the same date I'd once circled in red on a legal pad at 4 in the morning, I wired the first installment of my wife's treatment payment myself, on schedule instead of scrambling for it. The bank lobby smelled like carpet cleaner and cold air conditioning, nothing like the diesel and ozone I'd carried in my clothes for 24 years, and I noticed the quiet of it the way you notice a sound stopping rather than starting. The reinstatement had come through the following Monday. Contracted compensation restored, retroactive, plus a settlement Francesca's office structured as a consulting retainer once I made clear I didn't want my old title back exactly as it had been. $5.6 million, spread across a role that let me set my own hours and keep training whoever eventually earned the second federally designated seat Hollis Norwood had never bothered to create before. I signed that agreement once and never reread it the way I'd reread the one from 2009. I didn't need to. I'd written half of it myself, in a sense, just by living inside its consequences for 24 years. Francesca stayed on as general counsel and got a seat on the small committee that now reviewed any compensation change touching a federally designated role, a committee that hadn't existed 2 Fridays earlier. Samuel got a formal title to match the notebook he'd kept informally for years, Fleet Compliance Liaison, and a raise nobody had to threaten a federal contract to justify. Wade wasn't fired. His uncle wanted it handled quietly, and quietly, in that building, meant reassignment. A title with no operational authority, an office 2 floors down with a window that faced the loading dock instead of the skyline. His name came off the org chart's leadership page within a week, and the new placard on his old door was blank stock plastic, no lettering ordered yet, as if nobody had decided what to call the job that replaced the one he'd lost. I saw him once more in the elevator, watch gone, replaced by nothing, and he nodded at me the way you nod at someone whose parking spot you've been using by mistake. I read it eventually, he said. The clause. Little late. I said, not unkindly. He almost smiled. Yeah. I let him off first when the doors opened. It cost me nothing, and he looked like a man who needed one thing that day that didn't cost him anything either. Priya finished her federal certification 6 weeks later. I signed her designation letter myself, badge reel resting on the desk between us while I did it. The cord still frayed at the same spot it had been for years, the housing still dented from 2 decades of truck doors. I didn't replace it. Some tools you keep exactly as worn as the work made them. My wife's specialist called it a full recovery, eventually, the kind of sentence that means more than any number attached to it. I paid off what remained of the balloon note the following spring, in cash, standing at a teller window instead of doing it online, because some debts deserve to be closed in person, not cleared by an app. Nobody in that building fires the person who wrote the paperwork and expects the paperwork to forget who signed it. What happened afterward wasn't revenge. It was simply the file finally getting read all the way to the end.